In the high-stakes arena of international trade, where deadlines loom like storm clouds and negotiations unfold like a gripping political thriller, President Donald Trump has once again demonstrated his flair for the dramatic. It was just this morning that Trump took to social media, his preferred platform for dropping bombshells, to declare an extension on tariffs for Mexico, a 90-day reprieve that seemed to come out of nowhere. The August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline, he had posted earlier, emphasizing that it stands strong and will not be extended. Yet, in a twist that has become almost predictable in his playbook, the White House shifted gears, announcing on July 31st that while they stood firm on no extensions for any country, Mexico would get that extra time. This wasn't merely a procedural adjustment, it peeled back the curtain on the intricate, often personal dynamics driving Trump's trade strategy, revealing who gets a pass and who feels the full force of his economic pressure. August 1st had been circled on calendars worldwide as the unyielding cutoff. For months, the administration had hammered home the message: no delays, no exceptions. Tariffs of up to 35% would slap goods from any nation that hadn't inked a new trade deal with the United States. This deadline wasn't plucked from thin air. It had already been delayed once, from April to August, giving countries what officials described as ample time to negotiate. Public statements from the White House echoed a sense of inevitability. The tariffs were locked in, the machinery of enforcement humming in the background. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, Trump blinked, sparing Mexico the immediate pain. The rationale offered by his spokesperson, Mexico's unique situation due to the shared southern border and its recent efforts in curbing drug and human trafficking, on the surface it makes sense. Borders matter, security ties bind nations, and cooperation deserves reward. Yet, this logic begins to fray when you pull Canada into the frame, a neighbor that's not just close but intertwined in ways that defy simple categorization. Canada shares the world's longest undefended border with the U.S., stretching over 5,500 miles from the Atlantic to the Pacific, a testament to decades of trust and economic symbiosis. The Keystone U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, CUSMA, still governs the lion's share of trade between the two, facilitating billions in goods and services annually. Energy flows north to south like a lifeline. Canada supplies more than 4 million barrels of oil per day to the U.S., according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, making it America's premier foreign energy source. If border proximity and strategic partnerships were the true criteria for leniency, Canada should have been first in line for that 90-day grace period. But it wasn't. The White House didn't even entertain the idea, offering no clear explanation for the disparity. Instead, in the hours leading up to the deadline, Trump escalated rhetoric against Canada, citing unrelated issues like its recent recognition of Palestine as a sticking point in negotiations. This had zero bearing on tariffs, customs, or commerce. It was pure politics, a pressure tactic straight from Trump's arsenal, reminiscent of how he handled Brazil in similar standoffs. This selective mercy isn't about consistent policy, it's a calculated political maneuver. Mexico's extension wasn't a nod to some grand strategic shift, but a reward for compliance, or at least the appearance of it. Mexico had signaled it wouldn't retaliate aggressively against potential tariffs, opting instead for quiet cooperation on border issues that play well in Trump's domestic narrative. In contrast, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, held firm. Negotiations continued, but Ottawa refused to be rushed into a deal that tilted unfairly toward U.S. interests. "They have to pay a fair rate, that's all, it's very simple," Trump said in a recent interview, lambasting Canada for what he called years of unfair treatment toward American farmers. "They've been charging very, very high tariffs to our farmers, very badly. They've been treating our country very badly for years. And look, we like Canada, I love Canada, I have so many friends in Canada, but they've been very poorly led." It's classic Trump, affection laced with accusation, designed to soften the blow while justifying the squeeze. In Trump's worldview, defiance doesn't earn extensions, it paints a bullseye. Canada's refusal to fold under pressure might have been intended to spark panic in Ottawa, forcing a hasty concession, but it didn't. Canadian officials maintained their composure, no frantic tweets, no emergency press conferences, no 11th-hour signatures on dotted lines. Economists across Canadian think tanks and media outlets have highlighted a key advantage. Over 80% of Canadian exports to the U.S. still move tariff-free under CUSMA's provisions. This isn't just a buffer, it's leverage, buying time to negotiate from strength rather than desperation. As one Canadian commentator quipped in a recent op-ed, "This guy will say something one day and he'll wake up and the cheese slips off the cracker, and then all of a sudden he goes the other way, and you're thinking, how do you deal with a guy like this?" It's a sentiment that captures the exasperation felt by many allies navigating Trump's unpredictable style. What unfolded on August 1st wasn't the rigid enforcement of a rulebook but the fluid execution of one man's personal playbook. Deadlines bend not to logic, but to optics and allegiance. Mexico got the extension because it aligned with Trump's border security narrative, a hot-button issue that resonates with his base. Canada was denied because it dared to stand its ground, refusing to let theatrics dictate terms. But trade wars aren't won on stage alone. They're shaped by the quiet calculations of economies and the resilience of partnerships. Canada's measured approach, prioritizing clarity over chaos, could emerge as the shrewdest play, proving that in the long game of global commerce, patience often trumps impulse. This pattern of selective pressure and dramatic reveals extended beyond North America, as Trump turned his attention to other key players. Just 2 days before the August 1st deadline, he announced a deal with South Korea, a vital U.S. trading partner in Asia. The agreement locked in tariffs at 15%, a figure trumpeted as a victory for American workers. But the fanfare didn't stop there. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick boasted that South Korea would pour $350 billion into U.S.-owned and controlled investments, with 90% of profits benefiting Americans, all orchestrated under Trump's directive. It sounded like a masterstroke, an infusion of capital that could bolster industries from manufacturing to tech. Yet, as the dust settled, questions mounted. Where was the legal framework to enforce this? What mechanisms ensured compliance? The announcement echoed Trump's earlier pact with Japan, where promises of $550 billion in investments were later scaled back dramatically, the initial hype giving way to a more modest reality. This isn't isolated, it's a recurring theme in Trump's trade diplomacy. Take Europe, for instance, which recently pledged to buy vast quantities of U.S. energy, figures in the hundreds of billions. But does the EU truly need that volume? Can American producers even ramp up supply to meet it? The numbers dazzle in headlines, but their foundations often prove shaky upon closer inspection. Fox News amplified the narrative, claiming tariffs had raked in $150 billion from foreign coffers. But the truth is more nuanced and burdensome. Those tariffs aren't paid by overseas governments. They're shouldered by American importers, who frequently pass the costs on to consumers through higher prices. It's economic theater at its finest, stack towering figures, broadcast them via sympathetic outlets, and craft an image of unchallenged dominance. Underneath, however, corporations whisper warnings of layoffs, inflated costs, and eroded profits. Even the Federal Reserve has paused on rate cuts, citing the fog of uncertainty these policies create. As Trump sealed his South Korea deal, Canada's stance sharpened into focus. And it wasn't the capitulation Washington anticipated. Prime Minister Carney addressed the nation, confirming no agreement had been reached and none was imminent by the deadline. Negotiators lingered in D.C., but the tone was resolute. Ottawa wouldn't sprint toward a subpar accord. Carney described the discussions as complex and constructive, touching on defense, security, and investment, areas where U.S.-Canada ties run deep. Unlike Trump's penchant for announcing first and detailing later, Canada opted for transparency, no deal unless it genuinely serves Canadians. This contrast underscores a flaw in Trump's high-wire act. He wagered that allies would scramble to comply before August 1st, a bet that paid off with Brussels and Seoul through billion-dollar pledges wrapped in patriotic rhetoric. But Canada's holdout exposes the strategy's vulnerabilities. Partners like Japan and Europe have murmured disputes over the terms privately, while Canada voices them openly. The ripple effects of this approach are profound, sowing confusion in global markets. Businesses hesitate, investors waver, and the Fed's caution reflects broader unease. If Canada persists in its resistance, the White House might impose those 35% tariffs, hammering cross-border trade that sustains millions of jobs on both sides. Unlike more distant allies, Canada has telegraphed its unwillingness to be coerced, positioning itself as a counterpoint to the rush of concessions elsewhere. In the 11th hour before the deadline, the tally isn't as triumphant as the soundbites suggest. Deals with Europe and South Korea appear hasty, nebulous, and tailored for political gain, while Canada's deliberate pace might just rewrite the narrative. Consider the whirlwind with Europe. Trump met with EU leaders, entering with a candid 50/50ths inches assessment of success. "We had a meeting, I wasn't sure," I said 50/50ths. "I think you probably felt the same thing." Yet in under an hour he emerged to proclaim the biggest trade deal ever made. This isn't novel. Days prior he applied the same feint to Canada, musing to reporters that a deal might elude them entirely, leaving tariffs as the default. "I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs, not really a negotiation." Then, abruptly the script flipped with Europe, from skepticism to spectacle. It's negotiation as performance art, suspense builds, doubt simmers, and victory erupts for the cameras. For observers it projects strength. For partners like Canada, it poses a dilemma. If others ink deals merely to dodge tariffs, should Ottawa defy the trend and demand substance? Trump's deals often resemble sketches rather than blueprints, broad strokes lacking enforceable details. Timelines? Absent. Penalties for non-delivery? Undefined. This vagueness empowers Trump to reinterpret terms on a whim, post-handshake. It's a boon for domestic politics but a hazard for allies who risk commitments that evaporate with the next tweet. Canada views this as both cautionary tale and opening. Rather than emulate Japan's or Europe's acquiescence, it could insist on ironclad provisions, shielding against future whims. Beneath the bravado, costs accrue, and they land squarely on American shoulders. The 15% tariff on EU imports, heralded as a win, equates to a tax on U.S. consumers from the world's second-largest economy. The bottom line is that the American people are going to be paying a 15% tax on any imports from this, the world's second-largest collective economy, and that's the European Union. That is not a good thing for American consumers. Exemptions exist for pharmaceuticals, but steel and aluminum face 50% hikes, and the rest absorbs the hit. Industries reliant on European components, German auto parts, Italian machinery, now grapple with escalated expenses, inevitably trickling to shoppers. Small businesses suffer most. Unlike conglomerates, they can't easily pivot supply chains or swallow margins. Hiring freezes, reduced hours, or price surges follow, exacerbating inflation in an already tentative recovery. The touted perks, $600 billion in EU investments, $750 billion in energy buys, sound transformative but remain hazy, stretched over indefinite periods. Will they spawn jobs, ease prices? Short-term evidence is scant. It's a veiled levy masquerading as triumph. Canada could capitalize here, rallying U.S. sectors intertwined with its economy, Michigan automakers, Wisconsin processors, to underscore mutual harm from tariffs. We will, obviously we're working on behalf of Canadians, and we will agree a deal if there's one on the table that is in the best interest of Canadians, just as the United States will do. And we'll use all the time that's necessary, and agree something that's in the interest of Canadians if that's available. The temptation for a swift pact is palpable. No nation courts 25% or 35% duties lightly. But haste isn't synonymous with value. Trump's cycle of no-deal threats, followed by staged triumphs, is potent spectacle, yet Canada needn't participate. A methodical strategy might yield protections that elude the optics-driven settlements others accepted. In trade's chessboard, as in politics' grand theater, victory belongs not to the quickest signer but to the one securing enduring gains. Delving deeper into this saga, it's worth reflecting on the broader implications for American foreign policy. Trump's trade tactics, while rooted in his America First ethos, often blur the lines between economic strategy and personal vendetta. The Mexico extension, for instance, aligns neatly with his long-standing focus on immigration and border security, a narrative that has defined his political brand since his 2016 campaign. By framing the reprieve as a reward for Mexico's anti-trafficking efforts, Trump reinforces his image as a tough but fair dealmaker, one who extracts concessions on multiple fronts. This multifaceted approach isn't new. Recall how he leveraged trade talks with China to address intellectual property theft and fentanyl flows, turning tariffs into tools for broader geopolitical leverage. Canada's exclusion, however, highlights a selective application that prioritizes compliance over equity. The shared border with Canada isn't just longer, it's a conduit for cultural exchange, joint defense under NORAD, and integrated supply chains that make the two economies almost indistinguishable in sectors like automotive and aerospace. Disruptions here don't just sting, they reverberate through heartland states that voted heavily for Trump. Michigan's assembly lines, dependent on Canadian parts, could face shutdowns. New York's financial hubs, linked to Toronto's markets, might see volatility. Yet, by tying tariffs to non-trade issues like Palestine recognition, Trump injects ideology into commerce, risking alliances forged over generations. Economically, the fallout is measurable. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has warned that prolonged uncertainty could shave points off GDP growth, while farmers, Trump's oft-cited victims of unfair trade, continue to suffer from retaliatory measures. Canadian tariffs on U.S. dairy and pork in past disputes cost billions. A new round could exacerbate that. Meanwhile, the South Korea deal's $350 billion investment pledge, while alluring, mirrors unfulfilled promises from the first Trump term. In 2018, similar announcements with Japan yielded far less than advertised, with actual investments trickling in at under $100 billion. This discrepancy isn't oversight. It's a feature of a strategy that values perception over precision. For Canada, Prime Minister Carney's steadfastness draws from a rich tradition of quiet diplomacy. Unlike the bombast of U.S. politics, Canadian leaders often prioritize consensus and long-term stability. Carney, with his background in global finance, understands the market's aversion to volatility. By refusing to blink, as Trump might put it, Canada positions itself to negotiate from a place of strength, perhaps even rallying other allies disillusioned by vague deals. Europe, for example, has already voiced concerns over the energy purchase commitments, noting logistical hurdles in scaling U.S. LNG exports amid domestic infrastructure constraints. Consumers bear the brunt, a point often glossed over in victory laps. That 15% EU tariff translates to higher costs for everything from French wine to Swedish furniture, adding hundreds annually to household budgets. In a post-pandemic economy still grappling with supply chain scars, these hidden taxes fuel inflation, prompting the Fed's hesitation. Small businesses, the backbone of American entrepreneurship, face existential threats. Imagine a family-owned bakery in Ohio hiking prices on imported chocolate, or a tech startup in California absorbing fees on European software components. Canada's potential leverage lies in amplifying these domestic pains. By engaging U.S. lawmakers from border states, senators in Minnesota or governors in Montana, Ottawa can frame tariffs as self-inflicted wounds. Historical parallels abound. During the NAFTA renegotiations, Canadian persistence led to CUSMA's safeguards on dairy and autos. Today, a similar resolve could secure concessions on energy or digital trade, areas where mutual interests align. As August 1st fades into the rear view, the true test looms. Trump's flurry of deals, Mexico's extension, South Korea's investments, Europe's pledges, paints a picture of momentum, but cracks abound. Vague terms invite disputes, unfulfilled promises erode trust. Canada's deliberate path challenges this model, suggesting that resistance, not rush, yields lasting wins. In the end, trade isn't a solo performance, it's a symphony of interdependent economies. Trump's solo might captivate, but harmony demands partners who aren't just props. For the U.S., the question isn't who signs next, it's whether these agreements endure beyond the applause. And for a broad audience tuning into this discourse, it's a reminder that behind the headlines, real stakes shape our shared future.